Okay, yeah. So I was talking about the importance of the context. So I was about to give you an example of how the context matters. So I was stressing on the fact that when you're talking about the context, you are not saying, you're not giving historical details on the place or on the study background. Anyway, it's what's wrong? It's coming up. Anyway, it's come up, so we'll wait it to come up, and then we'll continue. Ah, it's here. So I need to share. Oh, this gets crazy, guys. Right. So obviously, the literature review, as I said, talk about the conceptual basis. Now look at my research design, which is the research methodology. Sorry, I haven't shared it. No, it's sharing. Zoom? What? Ah, okay, sorry. Now it's sharing? Yeah, okay. Right, okay. So that's my research methodology. Is that again? Sharing now? Yeah. So obviously the purpose of this paper, as I said, was to look at the dynamics between trust, government in the Niagara region, which is famously known for tourism. And obviously, when you look at the background information, I have provided factual details about the place that would convince my reader as to why the context is interesting to apply those concepts. I have not talked about how beautiful Niagara is, blah, blah, blah. But look at, well, obviously there are lots of political issues between tourism developers and the government in Niagara. And I've tried in here, in this paragraph, to try to tease out some of those political issues. So when you read this paragraph now, you would be convinced, okay, so I think now the context reinforces the purpose of the study in that place. The context reinforces the purpose of the study in that place. Let me give you another example. Here you go. Now, we did this study on Mauritius. Again, it looks at the impact of tourism in Mauritius. And look at my study site. And I said, well, we'll talk about data collection, but I've given such background information in here that talks about the importance of tourism in Mauritius. Okay, how Mauritius is moving towards the construction of hotels, integrated resorts, etc. And then I've mentioned the current tourism policies. So it reinforces the purpose of my study, guys. Okay, again, I'm not asking you to give me historical detail about the context, how beautiful your organization is, how many employees. Now, how many employees may become relevant if you're doing, for example, a study on labor turnover. Okay, you can give background information as at 2018, the number of employees was 200 compared to whatever it is. Okay, so I think I leave this part to you to decide what basically you include in that context or not. But I think I need you to understand the importance of the context in it. Do you have enough? Any question? So don't forget factual information. You may want to use secondary data in here. If you have existing policy documents on that topic, feel free to include them in there as long as it's making a strong case, guys. As long as it's making a strong case. Good. Now, obviously, To answer your research question, you need to collect data, great, which is fundamental. So you need to provide details about your data collection. How will you collect the data? Obviously, later on during the semester, we'll be looking at the different ways of collecting the data. But generally, you would have surveys, you would be using interviews, or you can use secondary data, or a combination of both, a combination of all three. How are you going to collect the data? You need to provide every possible detail about your data collection. Now, if someone asks you, why did you use an online survey, for example, to collect your data? What possible response can you give? Yeah, accessibility, yes. But obviously, you saying that is not enough. You will need to justify it using research articles. Okay, I can give an example, but that means sharing our screen again. Okay, for example, in the paper I showed you earlier on, we use an online panel. In North America, you have people who's registered to take part in surveys, local people. And every time they take survey, they get miles. So I had to convince my reader in here why using an online panel is valuable. Okay, because if I don't do that, people will question, oh, you've used a web surveys? What makes you think the web surveys will give you good data? What makes you think the web surveys would be reliable? Do you have any evidence to suggest web surveys do not contain bias, for example? Right? So all these are important considerations to discuss in here. How are you going to collect surveys, interviews? Now, obviously, whether you use surveys or interviews depend on the nature of your research and even secondary data. We'll talk about these later on. How are you going to collect the data? Now, your sample. Who would be your sample? Again, that would be largely influenced by your research question. Who would be your sample? Why did you choose those people? So, who? Sorry, in here, you need to also write, when did you collect the data? When did you collect the data? So, sample, who is your study sample? Why did you choose those? You've already explained in here. How did you choose? How you collected the data? Why did you choose those? How many? Right? So there are two elements in here. You have the sample size and the sample selection. What's the difference do you think this is? The sample size is how many? Do you think size matter? Yes. Let's say you're doing a study at the University of Mauritius. Currently it goes around 12,000 students. That becomes your population. Let's say you're doing a study on student satisfaction. Can you survey all 10,000? This is your population. This is your population, which is 12,000. You cannot survey for practical reason all 10,000, can you? You cannot survey all 10,000, can you? How many you should select them? 10, 20, 200, 500, 700, 800, 850, 750? So I'm talking about your sample size, which is known as your N. Because if your sample size is too small, let's say you said you've surveyed 50. But the obvious question is, are you saying to me the 50 represent the views of the population? Because the sample is a subset, remember? It's a subset of the population from which it is drawn. So how many? That needs to be justified. You have a whole lecture on sampling. Too big a sample is not good, too small is not good. So there needs to be a scientific justification of your sample. Let's say you say you're going to survey 500. Now I need to know, how did you select those 500? How? Let's say I say to you, and I mentioned in my research that I was present on campus every day from 5 o'clock until 8 o'clock to survey students. What's going to be your immediate reaction? Oh yes, but your research captures only part-time students then. How about full-timers? And if you said to me, oh, I was here between 8 and 11, I would say, what about those students who were studying after 11? So can you see how these pose problems? Okay, so you need to be careful in terms of how did you select your sampling. And this is where we're going to look, we delve into probability, non-probability sampling. How do you make sure, in fact, as far as possible, we need to ensure that the sample we use is representative of the population from which we draw it. Have enough? Now, your instrument. What do I mean by the instrument? You've said you're going to collect data with a questionnaire, for example. How did you design the questionnaire? How did you, let me, can I get rid of this? Instrument. How did you design the instrument? Let's say I've got a survey instrument. How many of you have ever filled a survey? For your friends, for your colleagues? How many of you thought, I'm not understanding what the question is asking? The question, if that happened, the survey is doomed. The research is doomed. Because if as a respondent, you cannot understand what the question is asking you, how can you give reliable data? So there's lots of issues with questionnaire design. Again, your questionnaire should have a conceptual foundation. Your questionnaire should have a conceptual foundation. So you need to talk about how did you design your questionnaire. And then, sorry, which was 3.4, right? 3.5, data analysis. How do you plan to analyze the data? Or how, well, obviously by the time you're writing it, is how did you analyze the data? Which statistical technique did you use? Which qualitative, if you're doing qualitative research, which qualitative methods will you use? Very often you've got a student who does all these right, but they engage in the wrong statistical technique. What happened? If any part of the research methodology is flawed, you are doomed. Go and have a walk in the park. Technically, you fail. Yes, yes, if you're doing quantitative research, we will talk about hypothesis. Next week, we will start the discussion of hypothesis. This is where the theory comes in, the hypothesis, if not next week, week after. And I'm going to show you how do you design hypothesis, what is the hypothesis, where does the hypothesis come from. So talk to me about your data analysis. And again, even the research methodology chapter should be informed by the existing literature. And this is what I said earlier on. So to write a good dissertation, you need to be a theoretical freak and a methodological freak. You need to know your theory as well. You need to know your methodology well. If you know that too, I'll give you an A+. Any question? Yeah. Yeah, but let me assure you that whatever there's good practice, there's always literature on it. Always, always, always. Because the literature has been informed out of practice. Okay? So whatever you think is good, search for it, you will find. In fact, there are, which term did you just use? Audience survey. So if you go to Google Scholar, you type audience survey, you will find articles on audience survey. If you want to do, say, for example, an observation, there are chapters specifically written on observations. So in each method that you use, there are chapters that specifically does that. Now, in this book, I published this book last year. Right. So this book, I have around 40 different chapters on research methodology. Okay, so the book is divided into 4 components. Introduction to research, the epistemological foundation. Okay, it talks about qualitative research, quantitative research, mixed method research, and other issues in the research process. You don't need to buy it, it's quite expensive. The paperback version is 36, but the original one is 195. You don't need to buy it. If you need chapters, I've got copies in my office. Okay, unless you want to buy it, I don't get the money though. If you want to give it to the publisher, fair enough. Okay, but I wrote this book precisely because I wanted to put all the methods together. So let's say you want to do, I don't know, secondary data, it has a chapter on secondary data analysis. Okay, it has chapters on how do you conduct surveys, etc. Good? Any question? Now, this is what I required you to do for your proposal. If you remember last week, I said there would be one big assignment. How much was that? 30% of the marks? There was mark assignment 1 and then the research proposal. Yeah, can I just have a look? Yeah, that's the core assignment 1. You will have to produce the first 3 chapters of your dissertation. Yeah, that's what I call the research proposal, and you know it as your core assignment 1. So which means the core assignment will also include the introduction that you will work for mark activity 1. And obviously, you may wish to bring changes to it, to improve it. You're entirely welcome to do that. In fact, I would encourage you to do that. But when you're writing these chapters, make as if you're writing it for your final dissertation. Because if you don't do it now, you have to do it anyway, unless you believe you're going to become older and wiser. That's something else. Okay? But what I would ask you to do is spend time in here. If you have problems, you come to class, you come and see me, we discuss it. I think my vision with that is, in fact, there are many MBAs. I do that with the MBA full-time as well, not full-time, face-to-face as well. So many of them, they work hard in the research method module, but when they actually start their dissertation, you know what they do? Just collect data, because everything is already set. Obviously, you can bring improvement, you can bring changes to it. You can also have the choice and say, I don't think I like this topic. I throw it, you start from scratch. But starting from scratch next year, when you're actually working on your dissertation, means you come back to where you are now. And you would agree with me that thinking about the topic is time consuming. Okay, so I would want you to go through this process this semester. Obviously, you will be assigned different supervisors. They may ask you to bring changes, but you wouldn't start with zero. Would I? Yes, the mark assignment you are going to give me, that's going to be assessed, yes. Oh, yes, that's the idea, actually. That's the idea. So when I give you your mark assignment back, you will have comments on it and kind of little things. Yeah? If it's wrong, I'm going to tell you. I won't fail you. Okay, I'm not going to fail you. I'm not here to fail you. In fact, I'm not encouraging you to go wrong, but you have the opportunity to go wrong. Right? And then this is where I'm saying, I'm going to say to you, oh, you know what, your research question doesn't make sense. Or I think the theoretical concepts are not clear. And then you build on that feedback to develop this. And again, once you submit this to me again, you can come and see me. I'll give you feedback on it. If I say to you, it's perfect, well, it might be perfect for me, but not for your supervisor. Okay, your supervisor may have different angle, but it doesn't mean you will have to change the whole thing. You will have already gone through the process anyway. That's my intention. Work hard, you'll have a walk in the park next semester. The more you study in peace now, the less you gain more. Because next semester you'll be struggling with you have workshops, you have different modules going on, family commitment, professional commitment. It's going to be hard for you. So why don't you try to leave next semester? You'll have a year, almost a year, right? Because you will submit your dissertation the last working day of August 2021. You will be assigned a supervisor by the end of August. You have a year. Why don't you use that for your data collection to make it even more beautiful? That's the idea. That's the idea. Question? Now, so chapter 2 convinces your reader about the theoretical foundation. Chapter 3 convinces, let me get rid of this. Chapter 3 convinces your reader about the methodological foundation. If these two are strong, whatever you're going to say now will make perfect sense. And hear the story. Chapter 1 is what are you going to do? Chapter 2 is the theoretical basis. Chapter 3 is how are you going to do what you said you will do? Or basically now, how you did what you said you will do. Now that you've done the study, give me the results. Chapter 4. Give me the results. Make sense? Now, in fact, you have gone through these stages such that when your reader reaches chapter 4, your reader believes in your result, guys. You are saying to your reader, look, I've gone through a strong theoretical underpinning, a strong methodology. Now, whatever I'm going to present to you should make sense. So you help your reader to embrace your result. Cœur ouvert. But if there's a problem with your literature or methodology, your results become very doubtful, right? When your results become doubtful, what kind of knowledge do you create? You create knowledge that's not going to be accepted by the community. This is when you will get, this is when people would start resenting your findings. But if these two are solid, in fact, this is where you're starting to create knowledge. And I said to you, the quality of knowledge you produce depends on the theoretical rigor and methodological rigor. Now that you've gone through that, give me the results. And obviously the results, if you've done a quantitative study, it's going to be in the form of tables, statistical tests. If you've done a qualitative study, it's going to be in the form of words, statements, opinions. Right? You have it, we'll come back to that. You have a chapter 4 where you discuss your results and you conclude. So chapter 5 and you conclude. Now, chapter 4 is presentation of result. Now, what's the difference between presentation of result and discussion of result? What's the difference between presentation of results and discussion of results? Presentation of result is you show me only what you found. I found that she loves me. Full stop. I don't want to know why, how, nothing. This is your result, what you found. Right? And obviously the quality of this result will depend on sense? But what do you think the discussion of result does? Yes. If you remember what I said in the very first lecture, as researchers, what do? We study reality. Remember, there's no reality. If you say, you know, the mean value is 3.5, there's no reality in it. Agree? So a good researcher turns the result into reality. Remember, because as researchers, we study reality. The result, the numbers, the words, they are not reality. You need to give meaning to your results. Right? You need to give meaning to your results, guys. And this is the chapter where you give meaning to your results, which is chapter 5. In chapter 5, you discuss the result, you extract meaning. How do you do that? You mentioned that. Exactly. You discuss your result in the light of existing literature. You discuss your result in the light of existing literature. Make sense? So basically, you're saying to your reader, this is the existing literature. This is how my results situate within the existing literature. And there would be a couple of possibilities. Well, actually, 3 possibilities. What's the first possibility you think your result would do? It would be similar to existing research. So the first possibility, your result will corroborate existing research. Corroborate existing studies. What's the second possibility? Do you think it should contradict or it could contradict? Do you think it's a problem if it contradicts? Why not? It will contradict. Now, of course, you should expect your result to be different. Because if you expected it to corroborate, why the hell are you sitting listening to me here? You could have just taken the findings published anywhere, apply it to your context. Agree? If we know that the literature says customer satisfaction influences customer loyalty. The more customer is satisfied, the more you're loyal. Do we need to do a study on that in Mauritius? Yes. We need to do a study on that on Mauritius. Why not? Because the result may be different. This is why we do research. This is why the context matters. The context may mean your result is totally different from what the literature says. And when this happens, you have a state of what you call confirmation bias. You contradict existing research, you contradict existing theories. Should you worry? Well, I think if you've got contradiction, you only need to worry if there's a problem with your literature and method. Because then the contradiction might not be with the actual result, it might be because something is flawed in here. But if these two are strong, the contradiction means what? Something interesting is going on. And this is what you do, guys. So when your result corroborate, you would say the study finds corporate social responsibility to lead to improved financial performance. Full stop. This study confirms the stakeholder theory, which you must have already reviewed in here. We'll talk about that next week on the theory, right? And it also confirms the numerous studies that have been published on this topic. You open bracket, you cite those studies. When you're citing those studies, are you not giving credibility to your findings? Are you not giving greater theoretical depth to your finding? That's what a good researcher does, guys. So when as a reader, I'm going through that, I say, wow, I understand now. So even in the Mauritian context, the relationship between CSR and financial performance hold true. So what does that mean then? CSR, should companies neglect CSR? No. So if your findings that have been conducted in Mauritius, together with the findings of hundreds of our research, suggest that CSR does influence financial performance, we know more about the relationship. Am I making sense? So you are giving your finding greater theoretical depth. Your findings are not left hanging around. Your findings are supported. Your finding has a strong base. Make sense? Now, do you think it would contradict? It may. It's very usual. Contradiction is not an exception. Okay, in the numerous research I've done, I've got very few that corroborate everything. Most of them, there are elements of contradiction, and I'll explain to you now how do you deal with contradictions. Now, when your result contradicts, you shouldn't worry. Let me give you an example. 20, 30 years ago, until recently, over the past 5 years, we always believe that customer satisfaction leads to customer loyalty. Right? All the research have proved that customer satisfaction leads to customer loyalty. But if you look at recent research in the marketing literature, researchers are questioning whether this applies in all circumstances. Because what we've come to find out, to know through research now, is satisfied customers are not always loyal customers. Why? Because the way we think, our society has evolved. We do not stick to one product always. No matter how happy you are with the product or service, you want to try something new. So the availability of substitute, the availability of a wide range of product means that you may well be happy or very happy with the product, but you still want to try a different product because as consumers, we are not becoming introvert. We want to try new things. We want to try new experience. Now, those studies that have contradicted those relationships, are they bad? No, they have brought an additional contribution to the literature. Because knowing more about a relationship, does it mean knowing only the good thing about it? It's also knowing where does the relationship apply, but also where it doesn't apply. Panadol, paracetamol, penicillin, antibiotics, do they work on everyone? No, some people are allergic to those. Knowing on which type of person Panadol works, knowing on which type of person Panadol do not work, we know more about Panadol. We help to save lives. So knowing more about a relationship does not only mean where the relationship applies. Research should also shed light on where these concepts may not apply. That's our job. Knowing more about yourself, does that mean only your strengths or your weaknesses? Both combine to increase your knowledge. That's what we do as researchers. So when you have contradiction, do not freak out. In fact, this contradiction, turn it into a very interesting argument. Turn it into a very interesting argument, and I think this is where you add value to your research. I'm not saying when you're confirming research finding you do not add value. I'm not saying that. But I think you need to write in such a way that, okay, so, oh, wow, I think the reason you've given as to why CS does not influence CL make perfect sense. I now understand why, even though everyone said they are happy with my product at the company, they are not loyal because you've got competitor products. That's what we do as researchers. So how do you write it? So let's say you found finding from this study demonstrate that CSR does not influence financial performance. Full stop. This is what I do when I read dissertation. I would say, so what? Yes, I can see that. Okay, you add another line. This research contradicts, or this result contradicts the theoretical underpinnings of many studies and the empirical results. Blah, 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 you cite. Together, these findings suggest that the relationship between CSR and financial performance does not apply in all contexts. If you put a full stop, I would give you a B. But I would still say, now what? Yes, you've given me the contradict. Do you think it's important that you give possible reason for those contradictions? Yes. So probably at this stage, you need to go further into the literature and see what possible practical, theoretical reason you might give for the contradiction. Is it because your context of the study is different? What could potentially explain the contradiction? This is what you're doing when you extract meaning from the finding, guys. This is what you do as a researcher. Can I show you how this works? Now, before that, let me introduce what I'm going to show you. Now, I'm not too sure I showed you this paper, but 2 years back, we started a research project in Brazil on the FIFA World Cup. Okay, and we wanted to look at how do Brazilians perceive corruption. You may all know FIFA is one of the most corrupt organizations. I think we talked about that. So one of my research areas is trust, right? And there's lots of evidence in political science and even in psychology suggesting that the more citizens perceive there's corruption in a country, right, the less they would trust government. So there's an inverse relationship between the two, right? So we apply this logic, and in fact, it's the institutional theory of trust. The institutional theory of trust suggests that the more there's corruption or perceived corruption, which is logic. Think about it in your case. When you trust government, you would say, okay, if there's no corruption, your trust increases. So we apply the same logic in the FIFA World Cup. Now, the only thing with FIFA, in every country where FIFA hosts the World Cup, FIFA sets up a local organizing committee comprising of government representatives, FIFA members, stakeholders, blah, blah, blah. Okay? So what we say, so corruption should influence trust in government, in the Brazilian government, but it should also influence trust in the local organizing committee of the games. Because theoretically, this is what you would expect, right? So we did the research, we collected data with around 3,800 Brazilian. We found that, okay, so while corruption had a negative influence on trust, this confirmed theory, this confirmed theory, because all the theory says what? Corruption, negative influence trust. We found that corruption did not influence trust in the local organizing committee. So we had a situation where part of the relationship confirmed theory, but the other part contradicted the theory. In fact, I was left wondering what could explain that. Okay, let me show you this paper now. So, okay, here the paper. Let me share the screen. Where is it? No, that's not the one. Okay, let me share the screen. Okay. Oops. Please remove this window. Anyone knows what's going on? Hmm? Click on stop share. Okay. So I open this first, okay? Oh, okay. Good. Okay. Now, obviously, this is what I've just been telling you. So this is what we found. If you look at this, forget about the other relationships. What we found, can you see perception of corruption? It was negatively related to trust, but the broken line indicate it was not related to trust in organizing committee, what I've just explained. So obviously, the fact that it relates to trust confirms the theory. The fact it does not relate to trust in here contradict the theory. So we provided a reasonable explanation. Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes to read that. From here until down, well, obviously right, from here until down. Can I move it up? So what's the message I'm trying to convey to my readers? Is that making sense? So what I'm basically saying is, let's say, take the example of Mauritius, right? Let's say there's lots of corruption going on in the Gene Fay project. Do you blame Gene Fay? Who do you blame? Why? Because you voted for that government. Government is closer to you, and this is what the political economy suggests. So arguments suggest, and in fact, I did a previous research on the distance of between local people and organizations. And what research suggests, in case of heightened corruption in Mauritius, in any private sector or public sector organization, you sanction the government because the government is accountable to its citizen. Gene Fay is not accountable to you. Likewise, in Brazil, the local organizing committee is accountable to the members, not to the local public. Brazilians are not even aware of the local organizing committee of the games, probably. And obviously, if there's corruption in Gene Fay, who is allowing that? It means that our legal framework, our institutional framework, are not strong enough. So after explaining that, my reader comes to know, oh, hang on. So obviously the relationship between corruption and public trust is not evident in all contexts and in all institutions. It's very much dependent what type of institution we are talking about. Probably citizens would not be bothered if there's corruption in the private institution. In fact, there is in Mauritius. But do you think citizens talk about it? But they talk about what? Exactly, because they pay taxes, and in return, they want the government to be responsible. So obviously, I have turned in here a no finding into a finding. So that's what you need to do in your discussion, guys. I can show you other examples, but I think you've got the point. Any question? Which means to say, at this point in time, when you're writing your discussion, you will need to delve further in the literature. So it brings me to the point again where you realize all the chapters are informed by the existing literature. So that's what you do in the discussion section. Any questions? Now, you're doing an MBA, right? So do you think it's fair that your dissertation provide policy implication for businesses? Do you think you need to provide some recommendation for business managers? That's what you're doing. So after your discussion, so 5.1, you can call it discussion. 5.2, recommendation. Or you can call it implication for policy making, recommendation, business implication, whatever you call it. Now, tell me one thing. Managers, are they interested in all this? They're interested in what? But now you realize, can you reach here without this? Managers today, they require analytical assurance that whatever business proposal, whatever business solution you're recommending should work. Now, you have followed a scientific investigation to reach this. And you realize that you wouldn't have been able to write a good recommendation that applies, that will work, without going through that scientific process. That's what the MBA does, guys. The MBA bridges the gap between academia and practice. It gives you the skill you need to bring in the scientific research process into a practical business context. Now, one of the most common mistakes students make when they write recommendation is that the recommendation could apply to any dissertation on CSR and financial performance in any organization. If that were the case, why didn't you take the recommendation made by a paper written by him on the US and apply it to Mauritius? The recommendation should flow logically from your findings. The recommendation should flow logically from your findings. If someone asks you, why are you making this recommendation? It's because my findings say so. Do not make recommendation out of the blue. Do not make recommendation that cannot be supported by your findings. If your finding says customer satisfaction influences customer loyalty, do not say we need to improve the image of the organization, because your research haven't proven that. You haven't even analyzed that. You should focus on improving customer satisfaction, and how do you do that? If two of you have done the same topic on two different organizations, your recommendation are likely to be different, guys. Do not make recommendation that's, you know what, sack all the employees, things like that. Make recommendation that actually make sense, are relevant, and are sensible. That should be a solid section for your dissertation. Couple of pages, not bullet points, well discussed. Okay, it should be clear. In fact, this is the part where you give to your manager, and your manager, obviously, you should prove that you've gone through this process, but make recommendation that can readily be implemented. That's why you're doing an MBA. That's why you're doing an MBA. So tomorrow, if you are to do a consultancy report for an organization, you have to go through this process. Otherwise, where the hell did this come from? Otherwise, you produce Timbuktu, not Panadol, paracetamol, right? Right? Can you imagine that you go to a doctor and the recommendation he makes to you might lead to your death, or might make you even sick, even more sick? Right? In here, the same principle applies. When you go to a doctor, right, you're expecting the doctor to give you a treatment where you will fall, you will feel better, right? Same thing in here. The probability of this recommendation work should be very high. Obviously, you cannot guarantee it 100%, but it should be very high. Any question on that? Is everything perfect about your dissertation? Yep. Yes, I'm coming there now. So this brings me to the point. If you want to find that further research is needed, which means that your dissertation is good, but have you been able to do everything in your dissertation? Are there things that you wish you could have done? So do you think you should recognize these as limitations? So you will need to have a section 5.3, limitations and scope for future research. Give your reader, if your reader is someone who is willing to do a research, give some hints how they can use your research to build up on their own research. There is normally 3 sets of limitation. The first one is conceptual, that relate to the concept. Let's say in this research, you have looked at the influence of CSR on financial performance. Obviously, it is the only determinant of financial performance. There are other determinants. Have you been able to look at them? Do you think it's important that researchers look at them? So that becomes the limitation because it relates to the conceptual basis of your research. It relates to the conceptual basis of the research. So you might say, readers should interpret the findings taking into account the research limitation. First, the study investigated CSR are the only determinant of financial performance. Full stop. However, research suggests that financial performance of a company is also influenced by macroeconomic factors such as inflation, economic growth, foreign direct investment, government policies. You cite, where are you inventing those? No, this is what the literature says. Then you put a full stop. It is therefore recommended that future studies takes into account those limitations and analyze the influence of CSR on financial performance by incorporating those additional variables. You've done two things in here, guys. You've shown to the reader you understand that your dissertation is not perfect. No one produces a perfect research, even Nobel Prize winners. One of the Nobel Prize winners in physics recently withdrawn one of his papers because she realized afterwards that there was something wrong with it. Well, obviously that's a different story. There was something wrong with the research. In recognizing the limitation, you're not saying something is wrong. You are saying, look, I had 9 months. This is what I could. That's first thing. Secondly, you also demonstrate to your reader that you know other literature surrounding your topic, though that talks about macroeconomic factors, though that talks about inflation, etc. If you have a question for your Viva, but didn't you think of including other factors? So, good question. If you turn on page 25 of my dissertation, section 5.3, I have actually recognized these are my limitations. So that's contextual, conceptual. Second is methodological limitation. You've used a correct methodology. Where is it? Appropriate. You think it's perfect? Let's say you've surveyed a sample size of 500 students. Do you think it's enough? Possibly not. Right? Possibly it would have been better to increase the sample size to 1,000. Obviously, it was good enough for your research, but you would expect future research to expand on the sample size. So everything that's got to do with your methodology, that's methodological. Second, third is contextual limitation. Let's say you've done the study in Mauritius. Let's say you've done the study in Mauritius on CSR and financial performance. How far do you think your findings can be applied to other countries? Do you think it can? Do you know that? So what do you recommend? That future research are conducted in other countries to validate those findings. Let's say you did that CSR and financial performance using data from the banks in Mauritius. Can that be applied to the manufacturing sector? You don't know that. It's neither a yes nor a no. You don't know. So you need to recognize that your research is limited contextually. How far your finding can be generalized to other contexts, to other countries, to other institutions is yet to be known. So what do you recommend then? Future research should test the relationships, should conduct the research in other contexts to be able to validate the findings. Finally, your final section is the conclusion. In the conclusion, you briefly state the purpose of the study. You briefly state the purpose of your study. Your methodology. And obviously, this is where you emphasize on the take-home lesson. What have we learned from your dissertation in general? What have we learned from your dissertation in general? What key lesson managers should take out or researchers should take out from your dissertation? How does your result fit within the contemporary business environment? What its value? And that's entirely up to you. That's entirely up to you. Should be open, well written, well thought of. If possible, you include academic literature, but obviously this is the concluding part. And then you put a full stop, you have your references. You put everything together, it tells a nice story about what's your research question, how did you execute the research, the theoretical basis, and what are the findings. Key difficile là. Any question?
We should have surveyed more people. We are saying that our center is not representative.
No, you're not saying that. You are saying, obviously, you've proved your sample size enough, but obviously, 500 would be enough. But if you want to get a more representative view, what do you do? Survey more, or you could not do that because of limitation. You're not saying, whatever you're recognizing a limitation in here, you're not saying, this is wrong in my dissertation. You're saying, this is good enough for the dissertation, but future improvement can be made. That's what you're acknowledging. Yes, you have formula for sample size calculation. You have formula for sample size calculation. Question? Which means, obviously, to conclude then this lecture, you have a lot of work to do. You have a lot of reading to do, and the reading should have already started based for the mark assignment part. So, any question? You're all good here. Maybe you are realizing that you better have a meaning. No, I think everyone feels the same. So the couple of MBA bachelors, you all feel the same, but at the end of the day, you all graduate successfully. You have to go through this pain. You have to go through this stress. And that's important. At the end of the day, I had 2 MBA students who came to see me while they've completed now, they wanted to do PhD. Do you know what they remember most? It's not about their graduation, it's not about their qualification. They remember how stressed they were when they came to the Bible. They were relating that experience to me. Obviously, they both got an A. But even it doesn't matter whether you get an A or B. What's important is the experience. That's what you remember. And that's what you have to go through. So good luck. Okay? And I'll see you next week. Now, please pass on the message regarding the workshop. Okay? And I hope most of you can be present for the workshop physically, not online. See you guys.